I've been driving long haul for 12 years, and what happened on Interstate 40 outside Flagstaff, Arizona last October still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My name is Rachel, and I drive for Mountain West Logistics, or I did, until this incident made me seriously consider finding a new career. It was October 15th, around 11:30 p.m., and I was hauling electronics from Phoenix to Denver in my 2020 Peterbilt 579. The night was pitch black with that desert darkness that makes you feel like you're driving through a void. I'd stopped at the Flying J in Flagstaff to fuel up and grab some coffee, planning to push through to Albuquerque before taking my mandatory rest break. Everything seemed normal when I pulled out of the truck stop. My rig was running smooth, fuel tanks were full, and I had a clear stretch of highway ahead. The weather was decent, no rain or wind, just that crisp October air that makes for good driving conditions. I settled into my routine, cruise control set at 65, CB radio chattering with the usual late-night trucker banter. About 40 miles east of Flagstaff, just past the Winona exit, my engine started making a noise I'd never heard before, a grinding, metallic sound that made my stomach drop. The RPMs began fluctuating wildly, and I could smell something burning. My oil pressure gauge started dropping fast, and the temperature needle was climbing into the red zone. I immediately started looking for a safe place to pull over. The problem was, this stretch of I-40 doesn't have many options. It's mostly desert with steep drop-offs on both sides. I managed to find a wider shoulder near mile marker 237, just before a long downhill grade. I pulled over as far as possible, put on my hazard lights, and set out my reflective triangles. When I popped the hood, I could see the problem immediately. The serpentine belt had shredded completely, and there was oil everywhere. Something had seized up in the engine, probably the water pump or alternator. Without the belt, I had no power steering, no air conditioning, and more importantly, no charging system for the batteries. This wasn't something I could fix on the roadside with basic tools. I climbed back into the cab to call dispatch and arrange for roadside assistance. That's when I noticed the headlights in my mirrors. A dark sedan had pulled up behind my trailer, maybe 50 yards back. At first, I figured it was just someone being cautious, giving me space while I dealt with the breakdown. But as minutes passed, the car just sat there, engine running, headlights on. I called Mountain West emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me it would be at least 2 hours before they could get a service truck out to my location, maybe longer since it was almost midnight. She advised me to stay in the cab with the doors locked until help arrived. But that car behind me wasn't moving. Every few minutes, I'd check my mirrors, and it was still there. Same position, same distance, just waiting. After about 20 minutes, I saw the driver's door open. In the red glow of my taillights, I could make out a figure getting out. Looked like a man, medium build, wearing dark clothing. My heart started racing. I'd heard all the stories about truck hijackings, especially loads like mine carrying valuable electronics. The news had been full of reports about organized crews targeting trucks at rest stops and on remote stretches of highway. They'd follow a truck until it stopped, then rob the driver and steal the cargo. I watched in my mirror as the figure walked slowly toward my truck. He was taking his time, staying in the shadows between the light from his headlights and my taillights. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his body language seemed deliberate, predatory. I grabbed my CB radio and put out a call on channel 19. Any drivers eastbound on I-40 near mile marker 237, I've got a breakdown and someone approaching my truck. Could use some eyes on the situation. A few drivers responded, but they were all miles away. One trucker said he'd seen reports of hijackings on this stretch of highway in recent weeks. Another advised me to call 911 immediately. The figure was getting closer. He made it to the back of my trailer and was now walking along the passenger side. I could hear his footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder. My hands were trembling as I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. The cell tower coverage in this area was spotty at best. That's when I heard the tapping on my passenger door. Not knocking tapping. Rhythmic, persistent tapping that seemed designed to get my attention without seeming too aggressive. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, trying to control my breathing. Ma'am? Ma'am, are you okay in there? The voice was male, sounded middle-aged, with a slight southern accent. I saw you pulled over and thought you might need help. I didn't respond. Every instinct I had was screaming danger. This was exactly how hijacking started. Someone approaches acting helpful, gains your trust, then things go sideways fast. I'd been trained never to open the door for strangers, especially on remote stretches of highway in the middle of the night. The tapping continued. Ma'am, I know you're probably scared, but I'm just trying to help. I've got jumper cables if you need them, or I can give you a ride to the next truck stop. The fact that he was being so persistent made me even more suspicious. A legitimate Good Samaritan would have taken the hint by now and moved on. But this guy was working hard to get me to open that door. I tried the CB radio again. This is a female driver with a breakdown at mile marker 237. I've got someone at my truck claiming to want to help, but I'm not buying it. Anyone in the area, please respond. Through the radio static, I heard a voice I recognized. Tommy, a driver I'd met at various truck stops over the years. Rachel, is that you? I'm about 20 minutes out, coming up from the Meteor Crater exit. Stay put, keep your doors locked, and don't let anyone in that truck. But the man outside wasn't giving up. He'd moved to the front of the truck now, and I could see him in my headlights examining the engine compartment. Looks like you threw a belt, he called out. I might have a spare in my trunk that could work temporarily. This is what really scared me. He knew too much about trucks for someone who just happened to be passing by. Most civilians wouldn't know what a thrown belt was or how to identify it. This felt like someone who had experience with truck breakdowns, maybe from targeting other drivers. I checked my mirrors and noticed something else disturbing. The car behind me had its license plate obscured. I couldn't make out the numbers or letters. The vehicle itself looked like a newer model sedan, dark blue or black, but with no identifying features visible. No company logos, no bumper stickers, nothing that would make it memorable. The man walked back to my door. This time his tone was different, less friendly, more insistent. Look, lady, I'm trying to help you here. It's not safe for you to be stranded out here alone. There have been problems on this stretch of highway. That phrase, there have been problems, sent chills down my spine. How would he know about problems unless he was part of them? I grabbed my phone and tried 911 again. This time it connected, but the signal was weak and kept cutting out. I managed to give the dispatcher my location and explain that I was a stranded truck driver with someone at my vehicle who was making me uncomfortable. She said she'd send a unit, but it would take time to reach my location. The man's behavior was becoming more aggressive. He was now walking around the entire truck, checking doors and latches. When he got to the back of the trailer, I heard him trying the door handles on the cargo area. That's when I knew for certain this wasn't about helping me. He was casing the load. I tried to start the truck, thinking maybe I could at least move forward a few miles on battery power alone, but without the alternator charging the system, I barely had enough power to keep the lights on. The engine wouldn't turn over. Ma'am, I can see you're scared, but you're making this harder than it needs to be, the man called out. His voice had lost all pretense of friendliness now. I'm trying to help you, but I can't do that if you won't talk to me. Through my CB, I heard Tommy's voice getting stronger as he got closer. Rachel, I can see your truck ahead. There's a car behind you with someone walking around your rig. I'm calling this in to the state police as a possible hijacking attempt. The man must have seen Tommy's headlights approaching because he suddenly moved much faster, jogging back toward his car. I watched in my mirrors as he got behind the wheel and started backing up, creating distance between his vehicle and my truck. Tommy pulled up in front of my Peterbilt, positioning his truck to block the road. He climbed out with a flashlight and a tire iron, clearly ready for trouble. The sedan behind me immediately accelerated, pulling out into the passing lane and speeding away into the darkness. I finally opened my door as Tommy approached. You okay, Rachel? That guy was definitely up to no good. I got a partial plate number and a description of the car. Within minutes, 2 Arizona State Police units arrived on scene. They took statements from both of us and put out a bolo alert for the sedan. An officer told me this was the fourth report of suspicious activity targeting stranded trucks on this stretch of I-40 in the past month. They suspected it was an organized crew working the area. The roadside assistance truck finally arrived around 3 a.m. While they worked on my engine, one of the officers stayed with me. He said the man's knowledge of truck mechanics and his persistence in trying to get me to open the door were classic signs of someone with experience targeting commercial vehicles. What haunts me most is how close I came to falling for it. If I hadn't been following company protocol about not opening doors for strangers, if I hadn't had that CB radio to call for help, if Tommy hadn't been in the area, I shudder to think what might have happened. The scary part is how normal this guy seemed at first. His initial approach was textbook Good Samaritan behavior. It was only the little details, the obscured license plate, the persistence, the knowledge of truck mechanics, the way he checked the cargo area that revealed his true intentions. I still drive truck, but I'll never look at highway breakdowns the same way. Every time someone stops to help, I remember that night on I-40 and how quickly a routine mechanical problem became a life-threatening situation. Have you ever been in a situation where someone offering help made you feel unsafe instead of grateful? How do you tell the difference between genuine assistance and something more sinister? My name is Marcus, and I've been driving cross-border freight for Continental Logistics for 8 years. What happened during a run from Tucson to El Paso last December nearly ended my career and put my family at risk. Even now, 6 months later, I'm still looking over my shoulder. It was December 8th, a cold Tuesday morning, when I picked up what I thought was a routine load from a warehouse in South Tucson. The paperwork showed electronics and household goods bound for a distribution center in Juarez, nothing unusual for cross-border freight. I was driving my 2021 Kenworth T680, pulling a standard 53-foot drive-in trailer. The pickup seemed normal enough. The warehouse was in an industrial area near the airport, surrounded by legitimate shipping companies. The loading crew had all the right paperwork, proper seals for the trailer, and they handled everything professionally. The manifest listed computer components, small appliances, and furniture, typical consumer goods heading south of the border. I started my drive toward El Paso around 10 a.m., planning to cross at the bridge of the Americas port of entry the next morning after my mandatory rest period. The first few hours were routine Interstate 10 through the desert, regular traffic, good weather conditions. My CB was picking up the usual chatter from other drivers making the same run. About 50 miles west of Las Cruces, New Mexico, I stopped at a truck stop to fuel up and grab lunch. While I was in the restaurant, I noticed 2 men in a dark green Ford Explorer watching my truck from across the parking lot. They were sitting in their vehicle, engine running, just observing. When I came out 20 minutes later, they were gone. I thought it was strange but didn't dwell on it. You see all kinds of people at truck stops, and sometimes law enforcement conducts surveillance operations. I finished my fuel stop and got back on the road, planning to reach El Paso by evening. That's when things started going wrong. About 30 miles from the New Mexico-Texas border, I began hearing sounds from inside my trailer. At first, I thought it might be cargo shifting. It happens sometimes with improperly secured loads. But these weren't the sounds of boxes moving around. These were human voices. I pulled over at the next rest area and walked around to the back of my trailer. The sounds were definitely coming from inside, multiple voices speaking in Spanish, what sounded like a heated argument. My blood ran cold as I realized what this meant. I immediately called my dispatcher. "Jim, I think we've got a problem with this load. I'm hearing people inside the trailer." "What do you mean, people?" he asked. "I mean human voices. There are people in my trailer, and they're not supposed to be there." Jim was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure? Could it be radios or electronics in the cargo?" "No, Jim. These are human voices. I think someone loaded undocumented people into my trailer without telling me." The implications hit both of us immediately. Unknowingly transporting undocumented immigrants across state lines is a federal crime, even if you're not aware of it. My CDL, my career, my freedom, everything was at stake. Don't open that trailer, Jim said firmly. Drive to the nearest border patrol station and report it immediately. Let them handle it from there. I was about to get back in my truck when I heard banging from inside the trailer. Loud, desperate banging, like someone pounding on the walls with their fists. Then shouting in both Spanish and broken English. Driver! Driver, we know you're out there! My heart was racing. They knew I'd stopped. They'd probably been listening to my phone conversation. We need water! Please, we need water! I stood frozen next to my truck. These people were in distress, possibly in medical danger. But opening that trailer would make me an active participant in human smuggling. I was caught between a humanitarian crisis and a federal crime. The banging continued, more urgent now. Driver, please! Children in here! Children need help! That's when I heard a different voice, deeper and more commanding. Driver, you listen to me. You don't call police. You don't call border patrol. You drive to El Paso like nothing happened. The tone sent chills down my spine. This wasn't a desperate plea for help, this was a threat. We know your truck number. We know your company. We know where you live. How could they know where I lived? I felt like I was going to be sick. My wife Maria and our 2 kids were at home in Phoenix. Had someone been watching my family? You call authorities, your family pays the price. You understand? I understood perfectly. This wasn't just human smuggling, this was organized crime with reach beyond the trailer. Someone had deliberately used my truck without my knowledge, and now they were making sure I stayed quiet about it. I called Jim back, my hands shaking as I dialed. Jim, this is bigger than we thought. They're threatening my family if I report this. Marcus, you need to get to law enforcement immediately. Don't let them intimidate you. But the voice from the trailer wasn't finished. Driver, we see you on phone. You hang up now, or we make problems for you. How could they see me? I looked around the rest area but didn't see anyone watching. Then I realized they might have lookouts stationed along the route, or even tracking devices on my truck. The voice continued. You drive to El Paso. Tomorrow morning you cross border like normal. At customs, you say nothing. After you cross, you park at Plaza de las Americas truck stop. Someone will meet you there. This was clearly a well-organized operation. They had the entire route planned, specific instructions for the border crossing, and a predetermined meeting point in Mexico. I was just an unwitting pawn in their scheme. What if customs inspects the trailer? I called out. That's your problem, driver. You make sure they don't. You're experienced driver, you know how to handle inspection. They were asking me to actively deceive federal agents. If I got caught, I'd face federal charges for human smuggling, conspiracy, and lying to federal officers. My CDL would be permanently revoked, and I'd likely face years in federal prison. But if I didn't cooperate, they were threatening my family. The way they'd mentioned knowing where I lived suggested they had done their homework on me. This wasn't an empty threat. I spent the next hour sitting in my truck, trying to figure out what to do. I could call the Border Patrol and hope they could protect my family while they investigated. But what if the people in my trailer were telling the truth about having children with them? What if someone died while law enforcement sorted this out? Finally, I made my decision. I called the El Paso Border Patrol sector office and explained the situation. I told them about the people in my trailer, the threats against my family, and my location. I also called the FBI's Phoenix office to report the threats against my family. Within an hour, Border Patrol agents, FBI personnel, and local law enforcement had surrounded my truck. They set up a perimeter around the rest area and brought in specialized equipment to safely open the trailer. What they found inside was worse than I'd imagined. 17 people, men, women, and 3 children crammed into a hidden compartment that had been professionally built into the front of the trailer. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and terrified. 2 of the adults required immediate medical attention. The agents also found communication equipment that explained how the people inside had been able to see me and coordinate with outside contacts. They had a cell phone with a live video feed showing the exterior of my truck. During the investigation, I learned this was part of a sophisticated smuggling network that had been using legitimate trucking companies for months. They would load people into modified trailers without the driver's knowledge, then use threats and intimidation to ensure cooperation when the drivers discovered what was happening. The FBI took the threats against my family seriously. They provided protection for Maria and the kids while they investigated the network. It took 3 weeks before they felt it was safe for my family to return to normal routines. Continental Logistics kept me on during the investigation, but I couldn't drive cross-border routes anymore. The company moved me to domestic freight only, which meant a significant pay cut. The stress of the situation affected my whole family. My kids had nightmares, Maria couldn't sleep, and I developed anxiety attacks every time I saw Border Patrol vehicles. The worst part was learning how easily I'd been manipulated. The criminals had researched legitimate trucking companies, identified drivers who regularly crossed the border, and figured out how to use our own vehicles against us. They'd turned me into an unwitting accomplice in human trafficking. 6 months later, I'm still driving domestic routes only. The FBI caught several members of the smuggling network, but I know there are others still out there. Every time I pick up a load, I'm more careful about inspecting the trailer and verifying the cargo. But I also know that if criminals are determined enough and sophisticated enough, they can use any of us. Have you ever been put in a situation where you had to choose between following the law and protecting your family? How do you handle threats from people who seem to know too much about your personal life? My name is David, and I've been driving over the road for 15 years. What happened on Highway 287 through eastern Colorado last March changed my perspective on what truck drivers sometimes have to face beyond mechanical problems and traffic. Sometimes we become the last line of protection for people in desperate situations. It was March 22nd, around 2:30 a.m., and I was driving my 2019 Freightliner Cascadia northbound through rural Colorado, hauling auto parts from Denver to Billings, Montana. The night was clear but cold, with patches of fog rolling across the highway. I'd been making good time and was ahead of schedule. Just north of Lamar, Colorado, I saw a figure walking along the shoulder of the highway. At first, I thought it might be someone whose car had broken down, but as my headlights got closer, I could see it was a woman walking quickly, almost jogging, constantly looking back over her shoulder. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket, not nearly enough for the near-freezing temperatures. No purse, no bag, nothing except what she was wearing. When she saw my truck approaching, she started waving frantically, stepping closer to the road to make sure I saw her. I don't normally pick up hitchhikers. Company policy strictly forbids it, and it's dangerous for both the driver and the passenger. But something about this situation felt different. This woman looked terrified, and we were in the middle of nowhere with no services for miles in either direction. I pulled over about 50 yards ahead of her and put on my hazard lights. In my mirrors, I watched her running toward my truck, still looking back down the highway like she expected someone to follow her. When she reached my cab, I rolled down the passenger window. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" She was out of breath and shivering. "Please, I need help. Can you give me a ride to the next town? Please, I can't stay here." Up close, I could see she was probably in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back and what looked like a bruise on her left cheek. Her hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. "What happened to you? Where's your car? I don't have time to explain. Please, there are people looking for me. If they find me..." She looked back down the highway again. "Please, I'll pay you whatever you want." Against my better judgment and company policy, I unlocked the door. "Get in. We'll figure this out." She climbed into the passenger seat, still trembling. "Thank you. God, thank you so much." As I pulled back onto the highway, I tried to get some information. "What's your name? Who's looking for you?" "My name is Jennifer. Jennifer Walsh. I was being held against my will. I managed to get away, but they're going to come after me." "Held against your will? You mean kidnapped?" She nodded, tears starting to flow. My ex-husband. He's not a good person. He has connections, people who work for him. When I tried to leave him last year, he had me taken. They've been keeping me at a house outside of Lamar. This was way beyond anything I'd ever dealt with. We need to call the police right now. No! Her reaction was immediate and panicked. You don't understand. He has people inside the police department. That's how he found me the last 2 times I tried to get help. I handed her my cell phone. Then call the FBI. Call the state police. We'll find someone who can help you. She took the phone but then froze, staring at my side mirror. Oh God! Oh God, they found me! I looked in my mirrors and saw headlights approaching fast from behind. A large SUV was gaining on us rapidly, much faster than normal traffic speed. Is that them? I think so. They had several vehicles at the house. Please don't stop. Don't let them get close. The SUV was now about a quarter mile behind us and closing fast. I pushed my truck harder, but we were going uphill and I was pulling a full load. A big rig can't outrun a car on the highway. What kind of people are we dealing with here? I asked. My ex-husband runs a business. He moves things for people who don't want those things tracked. Money, goods, sometimes people. He has men who work for him, and they don't ask questions. The SUV was now right behind my trailer, its high beams flooding my mirrors. Suddenly, it pulled into the passing lane and started coming up alongside my truck. I could see it was a black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows. As it pulled even with my cab, the passenger window rolled down. I couldn't see faces clearly, but I could see someone pointing something at my truck. Get down! I shouted to Jennifer as my passenger window exploded. The bullet had gone through the window and embedded in the sleeper compartment wall behind us. Jennifer was screaming, crouched down on the floor of the cab. They're going to kill us both. They can't let me live now that I've involved someone else. I grabbed my CB radio and put out an emergency call on channel 19. Mayday, mayday! Truck driver northbound on 287 near mile marker 184. I'm being shot at by a black Suburban. I have a passenger who says she's escaping from kidnappers. Need immediate police assistance. Several drivers responded immediately. One trucker about 10 miles ahead said he was calling 911. Another driver behind us said he could see our situation and was also calling for help. The Suburban dropped back and then rammed the rear of my trailer. The impact wasn't enough to cause serious damage, but it made the whole rig shudder. They were trying to force me to stop. Jennifer, I need you to call 911 on my phone. Tell them exactly where we are and what's happening. She made the call while staying low in the seat. I could hear her talking to the dispatcher, giving them our location and description of the vehicles involved. The Suburban pulled alongside us again, but this time on the passenger side. I swerved left to keep them from getting too close to Jennifer's side of the truck. That's when I saw the Colorado State Police cruiser coming southbound in the opposite direction, emergency lights flashing. The trooper had gotten the 911 call and was responding to our location. The Suburban's driver must have seen the police car too, because it immediately dropped back and took the next exit, disappearing into the darkness. The state trooper made a U-turn and caught up with us, escorting us to a truck stop in La Junta where we could safely stop and sort out the situation. What followed was hours of interviews, reports, and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Jennifer's story checked out. She was indeed a missing person who had been reported by her sister 6 months earlier. Her ex-husband, Robert Walsh, was wanted on multiple federal charges including kidnapping, money laundering, and racketeering. The FBI took over the case immediately. They'd been looking for Jennifer as a key witness in their investigation of Walsh's criminal organization. Her testimony, combined with evidence she'd gathered while being held captive, ultimately led to the dismantling of a major criminal network. The bullet hole in my truck window became evidence in a federal case. Continental Freight covered the repairs and didn't discipline me for picking up Jennifer, considering the circumstances. The company even commended me for the way I handled the situation. Jennifer entered witness protection after testifying against her ex-husband and his associates. I received a letter from her through the FBI a few months later, thanking me for saving her life. She said that if I hadn't stopped that night, she would have died on that highway. The scariest part of the whole experience was realizing how vulnerable we are out there on the road. These criminals had vehicles, weapons, and no hesitation about using violence to get what they wanted. If that state trooper hadn't been in the right place at the right time, the outcome could have been very different. I still drive the same route regularly, and every time I pass that spot on Highway 287, I think about that night. It changed my perspective on the responsibility we have as truck drivers. Sometimes we're not just moving freight, sometimes we're the only thing standing between an innocent person and serious harm. Have you ever had to make a split-second decision to help a stranger, even when it put you at risk? How do you know when someone really needs help versus when a situation might be dangerous? My name is Steven, and I've been driving long haul for Pacific Coast Transport for 9 years. What happened on Interstate 5 near Bakersfield, California last September still haunts me every time I climb into my cab. It taught me a hard lesson about the dangers of being a good Samaritan on the highway, and why some truckers refuse to stop for anyone, no matter how desperate they seem. It was September 14th, a Thursday afternoon around 4:30 p.m. I was driving my 2018 Mack Anthem, hauling a load of agricultural equipment from Fresno to Portland. The weather was typical for the Central Valley, hot, dry, with that hazy smog that makes everything look washed out. Traffic was moving well, and I was making good time on what should have been a routine run. About 15 miles north of Bakersfield, just past the Grapevine grade, I noticed a burgundy Honda Accord pulled over on the right shoulder with its hood up. Steam was pouring from the engine compartment, and I could see someone standing next to the car, a young woman who looked to be in her 20s, wearing a yellow sundress and frantically waving at passing traffic. I've always been the type to help people when I can. My father raised me to believe that when someone's in trouble on the road, you stop if you're able. I know it's not always safe, and most trucking companies discourage it, but I couldn't just drive past someone who was obviously stranded in the middle of nowhere. I pulled over about 100 yards ahead of the broken-down Honda and put on my hazard lights. In my mirrors, I could see the woman walking toward my truck, moving quickly but not running. She looked relieved that someone had finally stopped. When she reached my cab, I rolled down the window. "Having car trouble?" "Yes, thank God someone stopped," she said. "I think it's overheated." The temperature gauge went into the red zone, and then all this steam started coming out. "I don't know anything about cars." She seemed genuinely distressed and grateful. "My name's Ashley. I was driving back to Los Angeles from visiting my grandmother in Fresno. I've been sitting here for over an hour, and nobody would stop." I grabbed my basic tool kit and a gallon of water from my truck. "Let me take a look. Might be something simple." We walked back to her Honda together. The problem was immediately obvious. The upper radiator hose had split open, probably from age and heat. It was a common failure on older vehicles, especially in the Central Valley heat. "Good news is it's fixable," I told her. "Bad news is we need to let the engine cool down completely before I can work on it. It's too hot to touch right now." Ashley looked worried. "How long will that take?" "At least 30 minutes, maybe longer in this heat. But I've got some radiator hose and clamps in my emergency kit that should get you back on the road." While we waited for the engine to cool, Ashley and I sat on the tailgate of my truck talking. She told me she was a nursing student at UCLA, working part-time at a medical clinic in Westwood. She'd been visiting her grandmother who was recovering from surgery, and she needed to be back in LA for her shift the next morning. "I can't afford to miss work," she said. "I'm already behind on my student loans, and my rent is due next week." I felt sorry for her. She seemed like a good kid trying to make it through school and take care of her family. After about 40 minutes, I checked the Honda's engine and found it had cooled enough to work on safely. The repair itself was straightforward. I drained the remaining coolant, cut out the damaged section of hose, and replaced it with a piece from my emergency kit. I secured it with new clamps and refilled the cooling system with water and the coolant I carry for emergencies. This should get you to LA, I told her. But you'll want to have a mechanic look at the whole cooling system. These older Hondas are reliable, but when one hose goes, others might follow. Ashley was incredibly grateful. I don't know how to thank you. Let me pay you for the parts and your time. I waved her off. Don't worry about it. Just be careful driving, and keep an eye on that temperature gauge. She gave me a hug and headed back to her car. I watched her start the Honda. It ran smoothly with no steam or obvious problems. She waved as she pulled back onto the highway, and I felt good about helping someone get back on their way safely. I performed my usual pre-departure routine, checked my mirrors, made sure my load was secure, and scanned the area around my truck for any problems. Everything looked normal. I climbed back into my cab, started the engine, and merged back into traffic. For the next 100 miles, everything seemed routine. I was making my way through the mountains north of LA, dealing with the usual heavy traffic and steep grades. My truck was running well, and I was still on schedule to reach Portland by the next evening. It was around 7 p.m., just as the sun was setting, when I stopped at a truck stop near Coalinga to fuel up and grab dinner. The place was busy with the evening rush, trucks coming and going, drivers grabbing food and supplies before continuing their runs. I parked in the fuel island and started my usual routine. While the diesel was flowing, I did a walk-around inspection of my truck and trailer. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The passenger door of my cab was slightly ajar, not much, maybe an inch, but enough to show that the latch wasn't fully engaged. I always check my doors before leaving any stop, and I was absolutely certain I had locked both doors when I stopped to help Ashley. My heart started pounding as I realized what this might mean. Someone had been in my truck while I was working on the Honda. But who? And more importantly, were they still there? I finished fueling and moved to a parking spot where I could investigate without blocking other drivers. I approached the passenger door carefully, listening for any sounds from inside the cab. The truck was quiet except for the normal ticking of the cooling engine. I opened the passenger door and immediately saw signs that someone had been inside. My logbook was on the floor instead of in its usual spot on the dashboard. The glove compartment was open, and papers were scattered around. Someone had definitely been searching through my things. But that wasn't the worst part. When I looked toward the sleeper compartment, I could see that the curtain separating the driving area from the sleeping area was pulled closed. I never traveled with that curtain closed. I like to be able to see the entire cab from the driver's seat. I stood outside the truck, trying to decide what to do. If someone was hiding in my sleeper, confronting them directly could be dangerous. But I couldn't just drive away without knowing who was in there, and what they wanted. I quietly reached under my seat and grabbed the tire iron I kept there for emergencies. Then I called out, "I know someone's in there. You need to come out now, or I'm calling the police." For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard movement from the sleeper compartment, the sound of someone shifting position, trying to stay quiet. "I'm not playing games," I said louder this time. "Come out now, or I'm calling 911. That's when I heard a voice, a male voice, young, maybe late teens or early 20s. "Please don't call the cops, man. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. Then come out where I can see you." Slowly, the curtain opened, and a young man emerged from the sleeper compartment. He was thin, maybe 19 or 20, wearing dirty jeans and a torn t-shirt. His hair was long and unkempt, and he looked like he hadn't had a shower in days. "How long have you been in my truck?" I demanded. "Since you stopped to help that girl with her car. I saw you get out and figured I had a few minutes to grab some food or money. But then you took longer than I expected, and I heard you coming back, so I hid in the back." "You've been in my truck for 3 hours?" He nodded, looking ashamed. "I fell asleep back there. I haven't slept in a real bed in weeks." This was bad. Very bad. If law enforcement found out I had an unauthorized passenger in my commercial vehicle, I could face serious charges. My CDL could be suspended, my career could be over, and I could even be charged with human trafficking if they thought I was knowingly transporting someone illegally. "What's your name?" I asked. "Tyler. Tyler Morrison." "Where are you from, Tyler?" "Originally from Phoenix, but I've been on the road for about 6 months. I aged out of foster care and didn't have anywhere else to go." This kid was homeless, probably desperate, and had been living on the streets for months. Part of me felt sorry for him, but I also knew I was in a potentially career-ending situation. "Did you take anything from my truck?" "No, I swear. I was looking for food or maybe some cash, but I didn't take anything. I'm just hungry, man." I looked through my belongings and confirmed that nothing was missing. The kid seemed to be telling the truth, but I was still in a serious predicament. "Tyler, I need you to understand something. You being in my truck without permission is a federal crime. I could lose my job, my license, everything. I need to figure out how to handle this." That's when Tyler broke down. "Please don't turn me in. I've been trying to get to Seattle where my sister lives, but I don't have money for a bus ticket. I've been hitchhiking and hiding in trucks for weeks. I'm not a bad person, I just don't have anywhere else to go." I believed him, but that didn't change the legal reality of the situation. If I got pulled over for a random inspection and they found Tyler in my truck, I would face serious federal charges. "Look, Tyler, I want to help you, but I can't have you in my truck. It's too dangerous for both of us." "I understand," he said. "Just don't call the police, okay? I'll disappear, and you'll never see me again." But as I looked at this kid skinny, dirty, obviously malnourished, I couldn't just abandon him at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. Despite the risk to my career, I felt like I had to do something to help. "When's the last time you ate?" I asked. "Yesterday morning. I found some leftover food in a dumpster behind a McDonald's." I made a decision that probably wasn't smart, but felt like the right thing to do. "Come on. We're going to get you some food, and then we're going to figure out how to get you to Seattle safely and legally." We went into the truck stop restaurant, and I bought Tyler the biggest meal on the menu. While he ate, I used my phone to research bus routes and prices from Coalinga to Seattle. A one-way ticket would cost $127, not cheap, but manageable. "Tyler, I'm going to buy you a bus ticket to Seattle, but you have to promise me something. You can't keep doing this hiding in trucks, living on the streets. When you get to Seattle, you need to contact social services and get help." Tyler was crying now. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "Because someone helped me when I was young and stupid and in trouble. And because what you're doing now is dangerous for you and for the drivers whose trucks you're hiding in." I went to the bus counter and bought Tyler a ticket on the next bus to Seattle, which was leaving in 2 hours. I also gave him $50 cash for food during the trip and wrote down the contact information for several homeless services in Seattle. While we waited for his bus, Tyler told me more about his situation. He'd been in foster care since he was 12 after his parents died in a car accident. He'd bounced between different homes, never really finding stability. When he turned 18, he was on his own with no family support and no resources. "I've been trying to get to my sister in Seattle for months," he said. "She's the only family I have left, but I didn't have money for transportation. I thought hitchhiking and hiding in trucks was my only option." When Tyler's bus arrived, he thanked me again and promised to contact the services I'd given him information about. I watched him board the bus and felt relieved that the situation had ended without anyone getting hurt or arrested. But the experience left me shaken. What if Tyler had been violent instead of just desperate? What if I'd been pulled over for inspection while he was hiding in my sleeper? What if other truckers found out I'd helped someone who had illegally boarded their truck? The incident also made me realize how vulnerable truckers are when we stop to help people. While I was focused on helping Ashley with her car, Tyler had accessed my truck and hidden inside without me knowing. If his intentions had been malicious instead of just desperate, the situation could have ended very differently. I continued my run to Portland, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every time I stopped for fuel or food, I found myself checking my truck more carefully, looking for signs that someone might have accessed it while I was away. A few weeks later, I received a letter forwarded through Pacific Coast Transport. It was from Tyler, postmarked in Seattle. He'd found his sister, was staying with her temporarily, and had enrolled in a job training program through the city's Homeless Services Department. He thanked me again for helping him and said he'd never forget what I'd done. I was glad Tyler had found help and gotten his life back on track, but the experience changed how I approach roadside assistance. I still help people when I can, but I'm much more careful about securing my truck and being aware of who might be watching when I stop. The scary part is realizing how easily someone can access a commercial vehicle when the driver is distracted. Most of us want to help people in trouble, but we also have to protect ourselves and our livelihoods. It's a balance that every professional driver has to figure out for themselves. Have you ever helped a stranger and later wondered if you'd made the right decision? How do you balance wanting to help people with protecting yourself from potential danger? My name is Linda, and I've been driving long haul for Mountain Ridge Transportation for 14 years. What happened on Interstate 84 through Eastern Oregon last November made me question everything I thought I knew about faith, guardian angels, and the responsibility we have for each other on the highway. It's a story about how sometimes breaking the rules can mean the difference between life and death. It was November 18th, around 1:15 a.m., and I was driving my 2020 Volvo VNL 760 eastbound through the Blue Mountains, hauling frozen foods from Portland to Denver. The night was brutal, temperatures in the low 20s, light snow falling, and that bone-deep cold that makes the cab heater work overtime. I'd been on the road for 9 hours and was getting close to my mandatory rest period. The stretch of I-84 through Eastern Oregon is notorious among drivers' long, empty miles through mountainous terrain with limited services and cell phone coverage. It's beautiful during the day, but at night in winter, it can be one of the loneliest and most dangerous highways in the country. I was about 40 miles west of Baker City when I saw what looked like a figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it might be a deer or an optical illusion caused by the swirling snow, but as I got closer, my headlights clearly illuminated a person walking along the shoulder, moving slowly and unsteadily. It was a woman, probably in her 40s, wearing what looked like a hospital gown under a thin jacket. No shoes, just socks on her feet. She was stumbling, clearly disoriented, and in this weather, she wouldn't survive much longer outside. I immediately pulled over and put on my hazard lights. Company policy strictly prohibits picking up hitchhikers, but this wasn't a hitchhiker, this was someone in immediate medical distress who would die if I didn't help. I grabbed a blanket from my sleeper and approached her carefully. "Ma'am, are you okay? What are you doing out here?" She looked up at me with glassy, unfocused eyes. I don't know where I am. I was supposed to. I can't remember." She was clearly in some kind of medical crisis, possibly diabetic shock, drug reaction, or mental health episode. Her speech was slurred, and she was having trouble standing upright. "What's your name?" I asked, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Sarah Chin. I think I was at the hospital, but I don't remember leaving." This woman had somehow left a hospital in the middle of the night, in winter, wearing only a hospital gown. She was suffering from exposure and was in immediate danger of hypothermia. "Sarah, I'm Linda. I'm a truck driver, and I'm going to help you. We need to get you warm and get you to a hospital." I helped her into my truck and immediately turned up the heat. Her hands and feet were ice cold, and she was shivering uncontrollably. I called 911, but the call wouldn't connect. We were in one of those dead zones where cell service is spotty at best. "I'm going to drive to the next town where I can get help," I told her. "Just rest and try to get warm." Sarah nodded weakly and curled up in the passenger seat. I covered her with another blanket and got back on the highway, heading toward Baker City where I knew there was a hospital. That's when the strangest part of this story began. About 15 minutes after picking up Sarah, I started feeling drowsy. It had been a long day, and the warmth of the cab combined with the stress of the situation was making me feel heavy-eyed. I rolled down the window slightly to let in some cold air, and turned up the radio to stay alert. but the drowsiness was getting worse. My eyelids felt like they weighed 50 pounds, and I found myself nodding off for just a second before jerking awake. This was dangerous. I needed to find a safe place to stop until I could get Sarah to medical help. I was fighting to stay awake when I heard Sarah's voice, weak but urgent. "Linda, wake up! Wake up!" I snapped awake to find that my truck had drifted across the center line into the oncoming lane. If there had been opposing traffic, we would have been dead. I immediately corrected course and pulled over at the next rest area. "Thank you," I said to Sarah. "I almost fell asleep. You probably saved our lives." But Sarah was looking at me strangely. "I didn't say anything. I've been asleep since we started driving." I stared at her, confused. "What do you mean? You just told me to wake up. I've been unconscious for the past 20 minutes. I just woke up when you pulled over." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold weather. If Sarah had been unconscious, who had warned me to wake up? I shook it off, figuring the stress and fatigue were making me confused about what had happened. The important thing was getting Sarah to medical help. We reached St. Elizabeth Health Services in Baker City around 2:30 a.m. The emergency room staff took Sarah immediately. She was suffering from severe hypoglycemia and exposure. If she'd been outside much longer, she would have died. While the medical team worked on Sarah, I talked to the police officer who responded to the hospital's call. He explained that Sarah had been a patient at a psychiatric facility in La Grande, about 60 miles away. She'd been admitted for treatment of depression and anxiety following her husband's death, but she'd had an adverse reaction to new medication that caused confusion and disorientation. She somehow left the facility without being noticed, the officer explained. They'd been looking for her for 6 hours. She walked almost 30 miles in freezing weather before you found her. The medication reaction explained Sarah's confusion and memory problems. But it didn't explain what I'd heard in the truck. After giving my statement to the police, I was preparing to leave when a nurse approached me. "Are you the truck driver who found Sarah?" "Yes, that's me. She's stable now, and she asked me to give you this." The nurse handed me a note written in shaky handwriting. "Linda, thank you for saving my life. I don't remember much about tonight, but I remember you being kind to me when I was scared and confused. I also remember hearing a voice in your truck, a man's voice telling you to wake up. I thought it was you talking to yourself, but the nurse said you told the police you heard me warn you." "I never said anything. I was unconscious. I think my husband was watching over both of us tonight." "Sarah." I read the note twice, my hands trembling. Sarah had heard the voice too, and she'd identified it as male. I'd been so focused on getting her to safety that I hadn't really processed the voice, but now that she mentioned it, I realized she was right. It had been a man's voice, not a woman's. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I'd been on the verge of falling asleep at the wheel, which could have killed both Sarah and me, plus anyone else on the road. But something or someone had warned me to wake up. I contacted the hospital a week later to check on Sarah's condition. She was doing well and had been transferred to a different facility for continued treatment with medication that better suited her system. The nurse told me that Sarah had been talking about the experience, and how she believed her deceased husband had somehow intervened to save both our lives. Sarah's husband had died in a truck accident 6 months earlier. He'd been a long-haul driver like me, killed when another driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed into his lane. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I stayed in touch with Sarah through letters over the following months. She completed her treatment and was doing well, living with her sister in Portland. In one of her letters she wrote, "I know it sounds crazy, but I believe Robert was in your truck that night. He knew what it was like to be on those dangerous highways, and he knew what happens when drivers fall asleep. He saved us both." I don't know what I believe about the supernatural, but I know what I experienced. I was falling asleep at the wheel, putting both our lives at risk, when a voice I didn't recognize clearly told me to wake up. Sarah heard it too, and she identified it as her husband's voice. The experience changed how I approached driving, especially on those long, lonely stretches of highway. I'm much more careful about recognizing the signs of fatigue, and I don't push myself beyond safe limits. I also learned that sometimes breaking company policy is the right thing to do. If I hadn't picked up Sarah, she would have died on that highway. But more than anything, it reminded me of the responsibility we have for each other on the road. Every day, truck drivers, car drivers, and passengers trust each other to stay alert, follow the rules, and watch out for each other's safety. When someone falls asleep at the wheel, they're not just risking their own life, they're risking everyone around them. I still drive that stretch of I-84 regularly, and every time I pass the spot where I found Sarah, I think about that night. Whether it was her husband's spirit, divine intervention, or just my subconscious mind processing sounds I wasn't aware of, something saved both our lives. Sarah and I met in person about 6 months later when I had a delivery in Portland. She looked healthy and happy, completely different from the confused, freezing woman I'd found on the highway. She thanked me again for stopping to help her, and I thanked her for whatever force had kept me awake that night. "I think Robert would have liked you," she said. "He always said truck drivers look out for each other, and for everyone else on the road. He would have done the same thing you did." The most frightening part of the whole experience wasn't the mysterious voice or the supernatural elements, it was realizing how close I'd come to falling asleep at the wheel. Driver fatigue kills hundreds of people every year, and I almost became another statistic. If I hadn't picked up Sarah, if that voice hadn't warned me, I might have killed myself and other innocent people. Now I tell this story to other drivers, not because I want to convince them about ghosts or guardian angels, but because I want them to understand how quickly fatigue can overcome you. One moment you're alert and focused, the next moment you're drifting across the center line into oncoming traffic. The highway can be a dangerous place, but it's also a place where strangers can save each other's lives through simple acts of kindness and vigilance. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, we all have a responsibility to watch out for each other out there. Have you ever experienced something on the road that you couldn't fully explain? Do you think there are forces beyond our understanding that sometimes intervene to prevent tragedies? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.